the Shurangama Sutra, with excerpts from the commentary by the Venerable Master Xuanhua, a new translation from the Buddhist Text Translation Society. Part 2, The Nature of Visual Awareness. Chapter 2, Visual Awareness Does Not Move. Ananda and the others in the Great Assembly had not understood what they had heard, and so were silent. But they hoped that they would hear the Thus Come One continue to proclaim the teaching. Putting their palms together, they cleared their minds and waited for the Buddha to compassionately instruct them. Why did they put their palms together? It represents their single-mindedness. They were of one mind, not two. When your hands are apart, it is said you have 10 minds, and when your palms are together, it is said you have one mind, because when your palms come together, your mind also comes together and becomes one. Then the world-honored one stretched forth his arm and opened his shining, cotton-soft, finely webbed hand, revealing the wheel-shaped lines on his fingers. To instruct Ananda and the others in the Great Assembly, he said, "After my awakening, I went to the deer park, where for Ajnata Kaudinya's sake, and for the other 4 monks, and also for all of you in the 4 assemblies, I said that beings in their multitudes have not become arhats, nor have they become fully awake, because they are confused by afflictions that are like visitors and like dust. What, in particular, at that time, caused the 5 of you to awaken and become sages?" The Ajnata Kaudinya stood up and said respectfully to the Buddha, "Of all the elders here in this great assembly, I was the one who was given the name Ajnata, meaning the one who understands, because I had come to realize what visitor and dust signify. It was in this way that I became a sage." World-honored one, suppose a visitor stops at an inn for a night or for a meal. Once his stay is ended or the meal is finished, he packs his bags and goes on his way. He's not at leisure to remain, but if he were the innkeeper, he would not leave. By considering this example of the visitor, the one who comes and goes, and the innkeeper, the one who remains, I understood what the visitor signifies. He represents transience. Again, suppose the morning skies have cleared after a rain. Then a beam of pure light from the rising sun may shine through a crack in a door to reveal some motes of dust obscuring the air. The dust moves, but the air is still. Thus, by consideration of this example, the dust, which as it moves obscures the air, and the air which itself remains still, I understand what the dust may signify. It represents motion. The Buddha said, "So it is." When the sun has just come up, early on a clear, fresh morning, a morning after rain, the sun shines through a crack in the door, or perhaps a crack in the wall, and it displays the fine bits of dust bobbing up and down in space, moving all around in the sunshine. If the sun doesn't shine in the crack, you can't see the dust, although there is actually a lot of dust everywhere. But while the dust moves, bobbing up and down, space is still. It doesn't move. The ability to see the dust in the light that pours through the crack represents the attainment of the light of wisdom. When you reach the first stage of an arhat and overcome the 88 kinds of deluded awareness, you have the light of wisdom. Then you can see your ignorance, which moves like the dust in sunlight, and which causes as many afflictions as there are sand grains in the river Ganges. You will also see the unmoving stillness of your essential nature. Thereupon the Thus Come One before the assembly made a fist with his wheel-lined fingers, and having made the fist, he opened his hand again. Once his hand was open, he made the fist again and said to Ananda, "What did you see just now?" Ananda said, "I saw the Thus Come One before the assembly open and close his hand over his resplendent, wheel-lined palm." The Buddha said to Ananda, "You saw me here before the assembly open and close my hand. Was it my hand that opened and closed, or did your visual awareness open and close? Ananda said, "It was the world-honored one's resplendent hand that opened and closed before the assembly. Although I saw his hand open and close, my visual awareness neither opened nor closed." The Buddha said, "What moved and what was still?" Ananda said, "The Buddha's hand moved, but my awareness is beyond even stillness. How could it have moved?" The Buddha replied, "So it is." Then from his wheel-lined palm, the Buddha sent forth a ray of resplendent light that flew past Ananda to his right. Ananda immediately turned his head and glanced to the right. Then the Buddha sent a ray of light to Ananda's left. Ananda turned his head again and glanced to the left. The Buddha said to Ananda, "Why did you turn your head just now?" Ananda said, "I saw the Thus Come One send forth a wondrous ray of shining light, which flew past me on my right. Then another ray flew past me on my left. My head moved as I looked to the right and to the left. Ananda, when you glanced at the Buddha's light and moved your head to the right and left, was it in fact your head that moved, or else was it your visual awareness that moved?" "World-honored one, it was my head that moved. The nature of my visual awareness is beyond even stillness. How then could it have moved?" The Buddha said, "So it is." Stillness comes from movement. If there isn't any movement, then there isn't any stillness. So it is said that there is no emerging from the great Shurangama Samadhi and no entering it. That's the principle here. Thus, Ananda said that his visual awareness, by which he sees the Buddha, is beyond the characteristics of movement and of stillness. It's opposite. Without movement, there is no stillness. Both are gone. They are fundamentally unattainable and non-existent. They cannot be found. Then how could his awareness not be at rest? Then the Thus Come One told everyone in the assembly, "All beings need to understand that whatever moves is like the dust, and like a visitor, does not remain. Just now you saw that it was Ananda's head that moved while his visual awareness did not move. It was my hand that opened and closed while his awareness did not open or close. How can you take what moves to be your body and its environment, since they come into being and perish in every successive thought? You have lost track of your true nature, and instead you act out of delusion. Therefore, because you have lost touch with your mind's true nature by identifying yourself with the objects you perceive, you keep on being bound to the cycle of death and rebirth." Here the Buddha scolds the great assembly. He tells them that they are unable to discern their own true awareness. They take their physical bodies and their body's environment to be real. They cling tenaciously to the body and mind, yet every thought of the conscious mind is subject to coming into being and perishing. One thought arises and perishes, and then the next thought arises and perishes. People concentrate their efforts exclusively on the realm of coming into being and perishing, and have no real understanding of the true nature of their awareness. Because you conduct yourselves in confused ways, your true nature and your mind do not work together, and thus you lose track of your true nature. You mistake external states for your real selves. You take that in of yours as yourself. You shouldn't think of that in as you. That would be to consider yourself a mere object. You create all kinds of attachments. You fail to see through things. You aren't clear about truth. And because of that, you cling to death and rebirth. If you weren't so confused, if you stopped mistaking a burglar for your own child by mistaking objects for yourself, you would be able to end death and rebirth. To end death and rebirth is easy. All you need to do is turn yourself around. If you go forward, you head right down the path of death and rebirth. If you turn around and go the other way, you end death and rebirth. It's not that difficult, but it's up to you to do it. You simply turn around. You turn your head and pivot your body. That's all that's needed. It is said, "The sea of suffering is boundless. A turn of the head is the other shore." The sutra says that members of the assembly had renounced their fundamental minds and had relied only on their deluded minds, their conscious minds, their minds that make distinctions. They hadn't understood external states. They'd taken their distinction-making minds to be true and real. They had engaged in confused activities at the gates of the 6 faculties and hadn't the least bit of skill with regard to their true natures. You need to understand that the mountains, the rivers, the vegetation, and all the rest of the myriad appearances on this earth are the Dharma body of the Buddhas, which neither comes into being nor perishes. You must recognize the pure, luminous essential nature of the everlasting true mind, and your mad distinction-making mind must cease. It is said, the ceasing of the mad mind is full awakening. The mad mind's coming to a stop is the manifestation of our awakened mind. Because the mad mind exists and has not ceased, the awakened mind cannot come forth. The mad mind covers it over. The aim of this passage and every other passage of the sutra without exception is to reveal everyone's true mind. When Ananda and the Great Assembly had heard the Buddha's teachings, their bodies and their minds were serene. They realized that since time without beginning, they had strayed from the fundamental true mind. Instead, they had been mistaken about the conditioned objects of perception and had made distinctions about what are, in fact, nothing but shadowy mental events. Now they all had awakened, and each was like a lost infant suddenly reunited with its beloved mother. Putting their palms together, they bowed to the Buddha. They wished to hear the Thus Come One reveal the contrasting qualities of body and mind, what is true and what is false about them, what is real and what is insubstantial, what comes into being and then ceases to be, and what neither comes into being nor perishes.